Good morning.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm looking outside thinking, why is it so cold? I thought we were out of winter. And
I
then wait,
know.
it's actually mid-February. This is the temperature it should be. So I,
Yeah,
I think I was spoiled last week with how nice and warm
yeah.
it was.
I think Houston had the warmest start of February ever. I think we had like a whole week of 80 degrees weather, and suddenly I was like, I need to take out like all the, t-shirts I'd put away. I need them. And then as soon as you take them out, it gets cold again. And, a lot of people are like, why is it muggy and like cloudy? It's been like that for a few days now, and that's not what we're used to here in Houston. We are used to the sun coming out every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Mm,
it's a good reminder that weather's local. I think Brooke Money, who works with us out of New York, is still in the midst of winter. Like it's not letting up for her. And it reminds me of a conversation I was having with one of our members, William, at Cavern Energy Storage. Um, a lot of the challenges with just seeing climate change in a way is because weather is so local, and it's visceral and you feel it. But then like you don't really have a concept of how that affects things globally. And um, especially when we talk about like the energy transition and kind of the local effects, the way weather is changing across the country is different, right?
mm,
And so you
mm.
can definitely see how some people feel like a temperature change globally, might actually locally reflect in not that much changing at a temperature level, but a lot of like weather patterns changing. And it's just hard to like equate that back to like the reality of like what the data tells us.
Mhm.
And we're seeing a lot more of that like temperature shift happen on like the coasts where there are cities,
Yeah.
but not necessarily in the middle of the country.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so we live on the coast, I think, is the other thing to remember here in Houston. So sometimes we see things in a different way. But that was at uh, our uh, what was it? Our Energy Tech Conclave last week, uh,
Mm.
where we had a great discussion with the Clean Techies folks and Todd Bush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so for everyone joining, I hope you're here. I wasn't logged on to the LinkedIn live on my phone, so I was trying to do that so I could see like who's there. But if you're there, if you're joining us, say hi so that we know you're there. We can see it here. We want these lives to be interactive. So ask us questions. Feel free to put in your views on what we're talking about, what you've heard. And these are again Thunderwatch lives that we're doing once a week to give you a lay of what's going on in Houston, what's happening globally when it comes to energy tech, clean tech, green tech, everything that's going to impact our industry going forward. Energy Tech Nexus, we are a hub that supports, in particular, startups working on the energy transition. And we're here to just talk about what we're hearing, but also hear from you. So thank you for joining. So what Jason was talking about, this Energy Tech Conclave, it's an event that we do for our members 4 times a year. Is it kind of like quarterly event that we do? Do you
Mhm.
want to talk a little bit about that, Jason?
Yeah, actually, we do this one twice a quarter, so 8 times a year.
Mm.
And what we're doing with this is twofold. We got a great membership across Houston. I think there's something like 60 companies that we have represented. And we do like a field trip. We go out and see how different companies are developing their technology or running their business. And then we do kind of icebreakers or get to know you kind of activities because we want to make sure the membership really connects well. And it's more than just open networking. It's a lot of fun. I guarantee you'll learn something about people you never thought you would learn when you come to a conclave. But this one we went to Digital Wildcatters to their actual production studio where everything from oil and gas startups gets made, our show gets made, as well as I think a few others like Chuck Yates has his show there, and they got a good setup. And I think we had the clean techies in house, so we said, "Hey, come on by. Let's see how other people do things." And like anyone who's kind of in the industry, you like to kind of compare notes on how other things get built. So I think it was a good experience there. And then uh, going forward, we're going to be visiting other founders kind of in and around the ecosystem. I think it's a matter of seeing how different things get made in different industries. So I'm excited for that.
Hmm. Yeah, so this was kind of the first time we did it at Digital Wildcatters. They had a really nice room set up for us. We recorded a podcast live that's going to be available for you soon on the Clean Techies podcast. And we had Todd Bush
Hmm.
as the guest. And Todd Bush is really an expert in CCS. He runs a platform called Decarbon Fuse,
Hmm.
which has all the latest news, that anything you want to know about decarbonization, particular CCS, hydrogen, you can find it there. I often refer to him. He's a good person to be connected to on LinkedIn, because he posts some very interesting information there. So Jason, what any kind of insights for you from that talk? Anything that kind of stood out um,
Yeah.
for you that you want to talk about?
Yeah, like I'm constantly reminded how big these projects are and kind of where things matter. And there was a kind of esoteric discussion on like class 2 wells versus class 6 wells, and how much like carbon they're pumping into the ground. And it's easy to kind of get lost in that jargon, but I think that the takeaway was a lot of these projects that require permits kind of need permits because they're big, like financially big, physically big. And it's not just about land use, but having all this like infrastructure in place. And thinking back to some of the early technology startups we work with, I think it's easy to think about, okay, do we want to have this unique technique for maybe storing things? But the reality is, you just need to be able to have a technology that can scale up, that can kind of go into the production levels that Houston thinks about. And as much as like obviously the technology has to work, but like the things that matter are like how do we do this on hundreds of millions of dollars scale, and keeping track of kind of who's progressing was an interesting challenge. So I definitely appreciated the bigness of
Yeah.
it.
And I think when you look at these projects, it's like such a great reminder how often these projects, especially pipeline projects, they don't move forward, not because of the budget, not because of the technology, but because of permitting. And like permitting
Mhm.
delays are like, big dollar signs. Like it just, one of the projects, the Summit Carbon Solutions project, was delayed for 2 years because they had to reroute their pipelines 6,300 times. Like because of a pushback from farmers, pushbacks from the regulatory bodies in the different states. And Summit had a more complex project in which they're going through like 5 different states, and they have different requirements. They have to talk to different stakeholders there. So definitely for these projects, I think anyone doing any kind of multi-state project that requires regulations, regulatory bodies to be involved, landowners, these farmers who are concerned, and a lot of them, I think
Mhm.
initially it depends on your relationships with them and what you offered them the first time around. And a lot of them complain that, you're not
Mhm.
really offering us a lot for having your pipeline dig through our farmland. And then they come back and they're like, now even if you offer me $1 million, I'm not going to take it. So it's really those
Yeah.
relationships are key in moving these projects forward. And he spoke about, was there anything you wanted to add, Jason, before I talk about the
So,
project? Yeah.
go ahead, keep going. No, keep going.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, gosh, I wish I like taking notes. There was a discussion on like what do the numbers need to be to
Mm.
generate returns, and I think generally with projects, you're looking at like 12 to 18 plus percent like IRR that needs to go back to
Mm.
the project
Mm.
holder. And do you remember what number was thrown out?
Like
Next time I'll take
per
notes.
like was it about like per kilo of
Yeah, per
CO2
ton.
stored,
Yeah.
like per kiloton of CO2 stored? Um, I don't know. I think CCS is generally around the fixed 50, $60 or
Yeah. So I think that's the price they get, but I think the
yeah.
cost basis he was talking about, like I remember like in the
Yeah.
$40 range.
Yeah,
And
$40.
and so
Yeah.
and so there's like a few things that kind of speak to me about that.
Mm.
Gosh, on the other side of COVID, like the market was bearing like $5 or $6 a ton. So like
Mm,
things are very different now. But on the other hand, it makes me wonder. Okay, when we're technologists and we're going in and we're
mhm,
estimating, okay, my stuff needs to
mm,
cost $40 a ton. The
mm,
project itself is maybe going to be on the spot market, getting $50 to $60 a ton. Um, how much
yeah,
of that is like project risk versus like the plant, right? Like those are things where
yeah,
I really don't understand and would really need someone to explain it to me. But it makes me wonder if our goals for where the technology needs to be, it needs to
yeah.
be that much lower just because of all these other kind of expenses that kind of stack into the project.
Yeah. And I think one thing we spoke about was like the tax credits that you're
Hmm.
getting because of the IRA and the 45Q. The 45Q gives you $85 per ton of CO2 captured, and it's stored for at least 12 years. So that's kind of like our carbon market there.
Hmm.
For every a ton of CO2 that you store, that's some credits that you can earn, which is what has made a lot of these CCS projects viable in the past couple
Hmm.
of years and allowed them to actually be profitable. And in particular, what he spoke about is, the projects that you're seeing really taking off in the Midwest are ethanol projects. And
Hmm.
that's because ethanol has a premium. And I think he mentioned like $9 per, I guess,
Yeah.
ton of ethanol. Um, Again, don't quote me on the metrics there, but something like that he mentioned, and that premium that you get from ammonia and ethanol, where their carbon intensity is high, people are willing to pay more for it.
Yeah, and
Mm,
and I think I'd ask the question like, what's from a like a free cash flow basis, like how much is it because you get the credit 45Q credit, or how much of it is
mhm,
because of the premium the market gives? And the intuition is it's like 60% of it is actually just market signal.
mm, mhm.
Like, and this is RNG. This is like the actual sustainable alternative fuels. So the tax credit 45Q is important, but not the whole story.
Yes.
And it's I think that was important. And I think when people are thinking about, okay, like policy, what's going on at the national U.S. level, like is 45Q at risk? Like obviously, 40% of gross margin can take out a big chunk of your profit, and all your profit in some cases. But it also means, okay, what are the safe bets that people are going to bet on, and and it's going to be these things where you aren't fully dependent on 45Q, and as much as like the kind of lack of premium on renewable natural gas feels kind of low, like that it matters. And so I think that was kind of an interesting takeaway for me, was
Mm.
that 45Q wasn't the whole story, which was my impression.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, the conversations I was having with Todd before and after was like, it is legislated in the 45Q. So even if there was a push to take that away, it won't happen immediately. It would take some time. And again, it
Yeah,
would require um, Congress to change the laws.
yeah,
And
but
and a lot of the benefit for this is actually happening in red states.
yeah, I think
Um,
the
mhm,
the
mhm,
reality is, like, we're talking about permits. You got to talk about approvals. The reality is, the executive branch has a lot of discretion on how to interpret
mm,
the law, right?
mm,
And there is nothing like gumming up the works if you want to slow things down. And when we're seeing a lot of the kind of removal of brain space,
mm,
in the government, there's two strategies they could take. They could approve everything, which I think s- you know people like Neil Diamond would love, because he's all about removing the need for permits on good technology. But the other thing is you just get a backlog, right? Like the work
mm,
doesn't go
mm,
away, and someone actually has to scrutinize that the everything is in order. Especially when you realize a permit application is how many pages? Like, I don't know who's reading it, but I
mm.
assume someone's supposed to read it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And with less people, you could see that permit problem get worse, right?
Mm, mhm,
So
yeah,
there's literally two ways it can go.
yeah. Yeah, and I also wanna talk about, like, the CCS projects that's gonna probably be online the fastest. I think the expected date is end of 2025, is the Tall Grass Trailblazer project, it's called. And Tall Grass has extensive natural gas pipeline infrastructure in the Midwest. And how to make this project actually economically feasible for them has been to convert a lot of their natural gas pipeline into CO2 pipeline. So the
Mm.
infrastructure was already there. And so they're converting close to 400 miles of their pipeline into a CO2
Wow.
pipeline. And they're storing about 10 million tons of CO2 per year is kind of what their goal is. And that, to give you an idea, is about 2 million passenger cars per year off the road. So that's pretty significant. And all of these are coming from these corn processing facilities in the Midwest. There's a
Mm.
lot of farmland, um, and the CO2 that's captured from ethanol production. And I didn't know this, that majority of the corn that's produced today, not majority, but I think about close to 40% is used for producing ethanol.
Hmm.
That is then used for transportation fuel.
Hmm.
So there's been a high demand for kind of blending a gasoline with ethanol to reduce its carbon intensity, and there's a premium for that. There's a demand for people buying that fuel. But there's also been concern, as I was reading up on this, that a lot of these ethanol producing facilities are also worried with the uptake of EV that demand is going to go
Hmm.
down.
Mhm.
And so even though there's been a pushback saying, we don't want to be transporting the CO2, but the debate has really been about there are other facilities that are then capturing ethanol, capturing CO2 in other parts of the country that are, if they oppose it too much in the Midwest, there'll be opportunity elsewhere. And they're a bit worried about um, kind of the long-term viability of these ethanol facilities, especially if they're not able to capture CO2 on
Hmm.
them. Um, the Tallgrass project also recently announced a partnership with POET. I don't know if that's how they say the initials, or call it POET. That's the largest uh, biofuel producer uh, in the country, or I think worldwide, that will also be connecting their facility to the Tallgrass pipeline and capturing CO2. So that's a huge win for Tallgrass, that they're able to get these buyers,
Mhm.
um, not only buyers, but like what do you call these, off takers?
Off takers, off takers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
off takers, um, who are then providing their CO2. And then you have people like Microsoft or Amazon who want to then earn these credits and say, they're meet their net zero goals.
Yeah. So I think kind of to bring this back to kind of the startup ecosystem, um, but this is a big capex heavy industry. You're going to need big partners, and I think we had a lot of exuberance for kind of CCUS technologies in the last few years, and everything from membranes to, like, we saw Volta do a really good job of bringing their new technology to market, and it makes me wonder. What's the strategy for these companies as they go forward? Are you doing a little bit of elephant hunting if you want to matter? And I think there are other ways to lock in carbon, but it's clear, like, the gigaton class of technologies are starting to hit this stride where they're getting baked into big projects, and I suspect we're going to see a consolidation of the winners while we're in this kind of like deployment phase. And this is your classic. This is the classical definition of the valley of death, where people are going to get try. We're going to wait and see how it works. It's going to take 3 years for some of these projects to go, and the financial viability will dictate kind of the follow-on capital that happens beyond. And so, kind of my guidance would be to also just be very conservative until you get baked into a project. And even then,
Mhm.
you still got to be conservative. But in terms of the technology development, um, people are going to wait and see how these first few pan out, both from a regulatory as well as a financial perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think a lot of these startups are looking at, like, from the project development side. So the technology is already there, the infrastructure is already there, but then forming it into a project. So connecting a
Yeah.
buyer with a supplier, with someone who can transport that CO2 and store it. And, especially in Texas, in the Permian Basin, you have a lot of existing CO2 pipelines. You have these caverns where CO2 is often taken out and used for EOR, where you can probably inject CO2 back, if not there in other areas. So there's infrastructure there, and I think a lot of startups are also looking at how they can capture that in some way. And it's really has been over the past couple of years been based on the demand that we've seen from off takers.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm looking at the
Yeah,
clock. We got about 10 minutes left, and
I
then I got to
know.
jump.
I know we wanted, yeah. So I was
What do you want to
wondering
talk
if,
about? Go
yeah, I
ahead.
wanted to talk about, there's been a lot of development recently in the ecosystem with regards to Greentown Labs. They've just
Mm,
announced a new CEO. So I thought maybe we could touch on that. You know, Jason, you are the original founder of Greentown Labs, brought it to Houston from Boston. We've seen it really become what it is in the last 4 years. Um, Really an influential player in the ecosystem. Just your thoughts, you know, what you're hearing, what's happening. You know, they also just had a big raise recently. So let's just talk about that.
yeah, no, and I see Jan on here, who's kind of our counterparty for the Ion in terms of getting that built out. Um, Look, I think this is the fourth CEO in 2 years. Is that right? And the reality is the organization is kind of going through a rebirth. I would look at the $4 million as kind of a recapitalization of the business. I think for those who know, there was a lot of interesting financial challenges over there, and the new CEO has to fix kind of the structural challenges. And I think the challenge with a company that's been kind of uh, figuring out their future is that the world changes, right? And so, since the last 2 years, well, obviously, I have a new administration. We have a shift in kind of the work from home environment, and so never met Georgina. She seems really, really sharp, but she's got her work cut out for her, and luckily, she has a war chest to go off and do that. But I think what's also clear is the organization's different, the market's different. There's obviously a lot of brain drain over the last year as people figured out where they wanted to spend their time, um, and that presents itself as both an opportunity and a challenge. Challenge in that you have a lot of lost institutional knowledge, um, but a benefit in that for a small company like this, the organization needs to be built around the CEO. And I don't really know what the headcount is over there again, but in order for Greentown to grow, they're going to have to pass through a growth phase if they choose to. But it's also fine for the organization to say, "Hey, we're going to stay put. We're going to stay at a healthy size and reinvest in the business." And um, I think there was a sense in the 2020-21 era that we kind of had to expand and kind of bring the know-how to the world because there was this need to address kind of climate and energy transition at a national scale. But the reality is the world's different, right? The political environment's different, and my intuition is the goal is to hunker down. And you think about where a lot of the startups get their funding from at the stage that Greentown plays. It's SBIR, it's some DOE funds, and we haven't seen SBIR be affected significantly yet. But man, for the same reasons I said before about permit regulation, I could see a lot of that stuff just slowing down. Your program manager at these places have so much know-how about how to like get money unlocked that if those kind of career program managers get cut, like who's holding the bag, right? Um, and I think it was something like it's like 80% of startups were like funded through these SBIR programs. Now, it was a small portion of the total capital that went
Mhm.
into the early stage companies because you're talking about like $200,000. And the headline gets dominated by like the forms of the world who raised 2 billion, $3 billion. But the reality is every company starts with their first $100,000 check. And so I could see that being very challenging as like the customer base um, the new customer base has a potential financial challenges. So it's a question of, will angels step in? Will states step in? The Mass CEC doesn't necessarily have the same coffers as like a NYSERDA. And I could see angel investors saying, like, let's see what happens because they're regular investors and they're not necessarily going to step into a place that doesn't generate returns.
Mm.
So it seems like a time to be cautious and it's good to have a war chest.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's interesting, and definitely good to watch out for, what happens there. And, it impacts startups everywhere working on energy transition technologies.
Mhm.
But this is really up to then incubators like Greentown Labs to really figure out, okay, how do we adapt? How do we support our startups now in this new environment, and continue with our ambition and mission, which is what we're also doing, right?
Yeah.
I see Jan here mentioning, and Jan, there's no such thing as a shameless plug. Um, we were going to mention anyways, but thank you for the reminder that we have. Jan is actually organizing. Jan Odegaard is, for those of you who don't know, he is really the. Let me see if I can show this on our screen. Yeah, there you go. He is really
Oh, there we go. Look at
was, I don't know what was his role, the managing director of
that. Yep.
Ion for many, many years, and really brought it to what it is today. For many years, I don't know how, maybe a year or two, uh,
No.
and to what it is today. And we all know him in the ecosystem. And he is now bringing Venture University to Houston. So there'll be a session from 5 to 7 p.m. on February 25th at Memorial City. There's an Eventbrite link. And if you're just listening to us, if you go and look at the recording of this Thunder Watch, you'll see the link to the Eventbrite. And if not, you can message any one of us. You can message Jan and we'll send you the invite. So that should be an interesting AMA is like Ask Me Anything, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. It should be interesting. What did you say? 4.5?
4.5 years, maybe.
Oh, 4.5 years. Okay, 4.5 years. Jan correcting us.
Oh, man.
Yes, 4.5 years. So that's one of the big events coming up next week on Tuesday. Other exciting things happening. We have a work Wednesday lunch at our new location at 820 Gassner Memorial on Wednesday. So join for that around 12. For our members, we do a founders circle. If you want to find out more about that, again, let us know. And there's some really, really exciting things coming in March. So follow our Luma on
Yeah.
Energy Tech Nexus. There's the Low Carbon Investment Summit coming up, invite only. So if this is relevant for you and you're interested, message us. And then for Sarah Week, we are doing an energy tech market event where we have like 4 really important and relevant sessions for the energy tech industry. So join us for that,
Yeah,
Jason.
and then
Mm.
maybe it's not on, your calendar, but, there's this, Avatar Innovations has their Brave New World launch, I think, on Friday. And so they're
Mm.
they're they're a group out of Canada, that has a great, like, alliance of Canadian energy companies, that are coming in, and they're setting up in Houston, right? And I know, I think Kevin over there was looking at a couple of folks in our ecosystem to help, lead, that launch here. Um, but I think kind of bringing back to earlier discussion on Greentown, the world evolves, and so there's a lot of things that are happening here in Houston now, where people now view Houston as an innovation ecosystem, and they're coming. And they're coming with other aspects to facilitate, and so I think this creates an abundance for entrepreneurs here in Houston, right? Like there's a new resource. There's what is it, the Nova program with NOV. There's Avatar coming in. There's obviously what we're doing, which hits another aspect of the ecosystem. Rumor has it Plug and Play Ventures is coming back to town. And I think that initial wave we saw in 2021, 2022, where there was a lot of organizations kind of dipping their toe in, we're seeing that second wave of folks who are here because the ecosystem is here. And the same with like Venture University. So it's really a great time to be here in spite of all the like national stuff going on. The city itself just feels like it's on an upward trajectory from an innovation standpoint.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to be in Houston right now and see what's happening. I mean, with the launch of the Ion with Jan 4.5 years ago, I think it's really made a big difference. Um, yeah, and Jan, yes, we want people to engage. So thank you for breaking the ice. And yeah, no engagement is too much. This is why we're here. This is why we do it live, so that you join us live and you engage with us. So thank you so much, Jan.
Yeah. And so I guess we're ready to wrap. If you want to learn more about startups kind of in the Houston ecosystem, we drop a podcast pretty much every other Tuesday. I think we're going to be interviewing the CEO of Refuels. Is that right? No, Refuel EVs this Friday. So
Mhm.
that's going to drop in a few weeks. We also, if you're working with a startup or are in a startup, love to have you join the membership. We try to make sure there's authentic connections across the ecosystem. The best people to learn from about how to build a business is from other entrepreneurs, and so that's part of what we do. Then, if you're a person in industry and you're looking to understand just kind of where the technologies are, what's going on, and you want to connect with entrepreneurs, we love to work with you and help you with your innovation strategy. So that's part of what we do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. If you're watching the recording, please leave comments, and we'll see you next Monday.
All right, see ya.
Okay. Thank
Take
you.
care.